Microsoft Excel offers loads of tools to help you analyze your data, run calculations, visualize your data with charts, quickly summarize data with pivot tables, and many other features. I got an excellent question the other day from a student of mine in my complete Microsoft Excel course on Udemy, and I thought I'd share it with you all. It's a really neat way to be able to create dynamic calculations. So here's the question that I got, and it was something like this. So open in front of you, I've got an example file. I've got a list or a column of sales amounts. And what I like to do is sum up those sales amounts. Now, traditionally, if I want to sum up a range of cells, we do something like this. I'd say equals sum, open up a parentheses, and I would go grab the range of cells, C3 through C12. Close that parentheses. There we have it. Hit my enter key, and I've now summed up that range. Now that's great. The sum function is perhaps the number one function, most widely used function inside of Excel. Very popular. But let's say I want to be able to sum up that range of cells, but there's going to be instances where I only want to sum up the first 5 entries inside of that range. Or I want to be able to sum up the first 7 or the first 10 or whatever it might be. I don't want to sum up the entire range. I want to make it more dynamic so I can tell it. I just want to grab the first 3 or first 5 or first 7, whatever it might be. Well, by combining multiple Excel functions, and there are loads of functions found inside of Microsoft Excel, we can introduce a technique called nesting. And we can make formulas do more work for us and perhaps become more dynamic in their approach, in this case, to summing up a range of cells. So in steps a function called offset. Let me talk a little bit about the offset function first before we get in and start combining them, doing this nesting technique with the sum function. So I'm just going to move over to the side a little bit and I'm going to bring in the offset. So I'm going to say equals offset. I'm going to open up a parentheses there. Now it gives me some quick little tips here. Just a little bit of information about the arguments of the offset function. And to get a little bit more help, with the open parentheses there of my offset function, I'm going to go up and click on the little FX button, my insert function button. It's going to open my arguments window where it's going to give me a bit more information about each of the arguments. So really the purpose of the offset function, and it tells me right here, says returns a reference to a range that is a given number of rows and columns from a given reference. That's where the offset comes into play. I want to offset from a given reference, for example, from C3, and I want to move so many rows or columns from that position. Take a look. So I could say my main reference is going to be C3. Now I can come down and tell it, well, how many rows or how many columns do you want to move from that position? Let's say I want to move rows. I'm going to move, let's go down 4 rows. We'll say 4. I'm going to go ahead and hit my OK. Actually, before I hit my OK, I'm going to say 0 columns. We're just going to move rows. And I'll hit OK. All right, 145. So from this position, we went 1, 2, 3, 4 cells down. And that's my offset. From the starting position, offset so many rows. And we can say, well, I want to move so many columns as well. But it's all based on a starting point, a main reference point. Now there's a bit more involved inside the offset. Let me get back in there again. I'm going to hit the little FX button. We've also got this height and width. Now, remember, we can offset from a specific position from the main reference point so many rows or so many columns, or I could just zero that out. I can say, you know what, I don't want to move at all. I just want to stay right there, right at that beginning point, right at C3. But I do want to increase the height of that reference. So right now we've really got a height of 1 cell. That's it. But let's say I want to get a height of 5. Well, what's that going to give me? Well, I'm starting at this position, 2, 3, 4, 5. My new reference would become C3 down 2, 3, 4, 5 to C7. That would be the height of my reference. When you see down here, height is the height in number of rows that you want the result to be the same height as cell reference if omitted. So whatever my beginning point would be, if I left it blank, that would be it. But here, I can tell how many cells high that reference should be. Or I could tell it the width, so I can include multiple columns as my reference. Now, what does all of this mean? One, this is the offset function, but we're going to use the offset function inside the sum to help us dynamically choose how many cells to include in the sum itself. Take a look. I'm going to cancel out of here. I'll delete out this old one. So I'm going to go back to my original formula, and I'm going to delete out that static range of cells, C3 to C12. I'm going to get rid of it. And I'm going to nest, I'm going to bring in the offset function into the sum function. Now to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to go hit the FX button. I've just typed in offset open paren. I'll hit the FX, and this opens up my offset arguments. So what's my starting position? I want to start at C3. I don't want to move. 0 columns, 0 rows, just stay where you're at. Start at that position. But I do want to say, let's change the height to 5. Right there. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Now it's barking at me because I didn't close the extra parentheses. If you look up here at the top of my screen, I've got equals sum open paren, and then I open up a pair and close the pair of parentheses for my offset, but I haven't closed it for my sum. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes, go ahead and accept the correction. It's going to close it for me. And there, I've now summed up the first 5 cells in that range. You can see here it's 720. I've just selected those first 5. I can see my total is 720. Now, let's say next time I need to sum up the first 7. Well, no big deal. I'll go back to the formula. I'm just going to adjust that 5 to 7. And I've now updated it to include the first 7 cells in that range. Now let's make this even more dynamic. Perhaps give the users a little more of an interface to work with. I don't want to have to rely on my users of this Excel document to have to go to the formula and make the adjustment. Well, what if I reference a cell over here? I say, let's put 10 over here. And I say, when somebody changes that cell right there, I want it to update the calculation based on how many rows, based on that number. Well, if I get back into that formula, I'm going to change it from 7 or 5 or whatever I got there. I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to make a reference to B3 or to that numeric value in that cell. I'll hit my enter key. So 1660, $1,660 is a sum of all of that. Let's change it to this 10 to a 5. And watch my sum. It'll update. There's my 720. Let's change it to 7. We saw that one earlier. Let's change it to 2. And now I've got a dynamic, nice little interface for my users to go to help them sum up some dynamic range of cells. Perhaps this is tied to a chart. That little value there is what you're plotting on your chart. Or it's tied to another calculation. And based on a number that you change, you're updating this calculation dynamically, which is updating something else in return. So try this out. I've supplied the exercise file. If you go down to the bottom of this blog post, you can download this exact same file and you can practice this, creating more dynamic content and a pretty slick interface for your users to go to help them update the calculation.